Welcome to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda.
And Jeff Drozda.
And today we're going to talk about someone who is up for consideration as a saint. And her name is Rhoda Wise, and you can go to rhodawise.com to find out more about her. It's RHODAWISE.com. But we found out about her in a different way, and we're going to try to explain that because if you heard our episode last week, it was about pilgrimages and retreats and the importances of them. We actually reran that because it had such a positive impact on people. And one thing that Dr. Ryan Bowler mentioned in that is the reason why pilgrimages are a great thing. And he kind of gave an analogy, like if you love someone, let's say you're dating or you're married to someone and you love them, you want to see, where they're from and what they experienced in their life. You want to know more about them. Even like after Jeff and I have been married over 30 years, we went back to Canton, Ohio last week for Jeff's mom's funeral. And while we were there, Jeff was showing me around to the places where he had lived as a boy, the school he went to. And it was a great experience. We really grew even closer being there together. And that's just kind of an example of how the pilgrimage is, right?
Yeah. So we went to the funeral in Canton, Ohio, and as most of you probably know, Canton, Ohio is famous for a couple things. And number one, it's the home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And many of you also might know that the Hall of Fame stadium there in Canton is named after Tom Benson, former owner of the New Orleans Saints. So there is definitely a connection with Canton, Ohio. And so I am, of course, a much lesser known person from Canton, but it was, even though it was a funeral, it was an enjoyable experience to see family and to reconnect, because as we always say, it's usually family. You run into the family a couple times a year, or even less, whether it's a wedding or a funeral. But we were able to go back to Canton, and so I said to Cheryl, all right, we're going to go see all these places where I grew up, where I lived, where my grandparents lived when I lived with them, and my middle school, my high school. And she played along. I don't know how excited she was to go to all these places all over town, but she seemed to be pretty happy and excited about it. So we did, and went through the various places and had some wonderful food. Found out that we accidentally drove by Dr. Ray Garandi's house in North Canton, Ohio. So you can hear him on every day here on Catholic Radio at 12:30 p.m. every day. No plug for him, I guess. No, he's not a sponsor, but it was an enjoyable experience because it was something that was important for us to do together. And one of the stops that we made was to the home and a shrine that is directly related to Rhoda Wise. And just like here in Acadiana, we have Charlene Richard and August Nunco Pelafugue as servants of God. Rhoda Wise falls into the same category as servant of God. So even though I've been to the shrine before, of course it was a funeral. Last time I was in Canton, but I didn't get a chance to go in the house. So we went there, and I guess really not expecting anything, huge or anything at all, because I knew a little bit about her. Cheryl didn't know very much at all about her, and so just wanted to share with you the little experience that we had, and talk a little bit more about Rhoda Wise.
And as you would expect, that since she is being considered, at least early in the canonization process, that she was a mystic and a very faithful, humble, holy woman who suffered greatly. And just to give quick background, Jeff, you said she was from West Virginia. Is that correct?
So yeah, so she was originally from West Virginia, and it was not Catholic at the time, whatsoever. And her sufferings began at a very early time in her life, because she did get married. Her first husband died after 6 months of a severe cerebral hemorrhage. And then she married a gentleman by the name of George Wise in 1917, and then they moved to Canton, Ohio, at that time. And unfortunately, her trials continued because her husband, George, was a severe alcoholic, and of course, this was during the Great Depression, and holding a job alone, it was difficult enough, let alone, having a husband who was a severe alcoholic. So changed jobs, moved 7 times, so it was a very difficult time in her life during this time.
And they couldn't have children, so they adopted, and that first child passed away. And then they adopted again. And the second adoption, they named the little girl Anna May, and Anna May will factor in because she is very much a part of the story and what else that Rhoda Wise was dealing with in life, I guess. But they had to move to a little shack because they lost their one home in Canton, and so this little 3-room shack basically became home for the rest of Rhoda's life to her, Anna May, her husband, and eventually her father, who moved in with them all too. So now she was born in 1888. So around 1931 is when the trouble began, and they had Anna May was a young little girl. She actually thought she was pregnant. And so she talked to Anna May, like, we might be having a baby. Is that okay? She was a little worried, but yet they were excited, and Anna May was excited, and they started sewing booties and knitting booties, I'm sorry. And then they found out that she was not pregnant. She had a 39-pound tumor in her abdomen, and at that time in Canton, there just was no one that could handle that surgically. They actually she had to go out of state, have someone who basically told her he didn't know if he could even do it. And he was able, to remove the 39-pound tumor from her abdomen. Everything seemed to have gone pretty well at that time. But unfortunately, it wasn't the end of the story. She came back, and there were multiple adhesions of that scarring tissue onto her, basically her bowels inside. She had to have many surgeries after that. I think she had 14 surgeries from 1931 to 1939. And on top of that, at one point when things seemed to be a little better with her abdomen, she took Anna May to make holiday cookies around Thanksgiving time, and someone came to pick her up, and she went to step off the curb at night. It looked like there was dirt on the ground, but there was actually a hole in the sewer, which was covered over by dirt, and she fell into it up to her hip. And this really caused a severe injury to her leg and her foot, which she didn't think, they told her, she would ever be able to walk on. So she began a series of castings that they were hoping that eventually she could have a brace that would help her to walk.
So if you didn't think that was bad enough as it is, her alcoholic husband had her committed to a mental institution for a short period of time because of her post-operative psychosis stemming from her numerous surgeries and operations. So, we look at this and we read it, and it's like, man, this story cannot get any worse. And it just goes to show you that, for those who might be mentally, physically, spiritually suffering, those are graces given to us. and it's really how we accept it. And if we and as we learn more about Rhoda Wise and her acceptance, it's really a model for the rest of us.
Yeah, I'm sure after all that darkness, you want to hear some of the light at the end of the tunnel here. But while she was in the hospital, at one point, in Mercy Hospital in Canton, Ohio, were nuns there that she met. And I think one was Sister Clement. Is that right?
Yeah, they were part of the Order of the Sisters of Charity of St. Augustine.
And they talked to her about their devotions, including the Rosary, including one of the sisters who had a particularly strong. I mentioned Sister Clement had a devotion to Saint Therese of the Little Flower, and so she tried to share these things with Rhoda, who had been raised in a Protestant family who had very anti-Catholic sentiments. And while Rhoda was full of faith, she really kind of chuckled a little bit about all these devotions that Sister was trying to get her to understand and appreciate. But she did accept a rosary. And at one point when she was in a lot of pain, she says, "Okay, Sister, I would like to learn how to pray this." And that was step one in her progress with her spiritual life. So she began praying the rosary, and as everybody knows, that's going to get you somewhere, somewhere good.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually she also was welcomed into the Catholic Church, and that was by Monsignor Habig. Monsignor Habig had visited her in the hospital at the sister's request and had come to know that Rhoda Wise was a very holy, sincere woman who was suffering greatly, and he was just there for her as a spiritual director, spiritual father, I would say. And then, she went through these sufferings, and at one point, when they came to change her cast, they noticed that there was an abscess again on the stomach wound, and this turned into a really horrible suffering that she had to endure for a couple of years, where this wound would not heal, and it opened a hole in her abdomen that they could not find a way to heal at that time, and her bowels actually were protruding out. Of course, you could imagine this would cause a lot of problem. They had to, every half hour, change the bandages. The seeping would actually, because they had no sort of antibiotic cream or anything to protect her skin, her entire abdomen was raw from the seeping that was coming from that wound. And I mean, just hearing this, I'm sure this you'd understand just by hearing this, but also in reading her diary, which she left at one point when she had to be in the hospital for a long time. They recommended that she start writing a journal. And so she has many entries about her sufferings, but about her faith. And I wanted to share one of those because just so you can kind of see.
And keep in mind, at this time, this is 1939. Medical advancements were not very advanced at that time, and she was sent home to die. So, not only mentally, but not only physically, but mentally, most of us would be in a panic or deep despair. But she writes these, I guess, not only reflective but inspirational writings from her diary.
In one case, on June 23rd, 1939, she says, "My stomach hurts so much, and that draining, I'm afraid, will make me lose my mind. If I could get some rest at nighttime, it would help a lot. I only sleep about 1/2 hour, and the burning wakes me up, and it just keeps up all the time. Little flower, won't you show you have much power with God? Do something about this. I don't care if I cannot get well, but I ask him to let me die or stop this draining." And she goes on to share her faith and her trust, and also her burden that she's trying so hard to alleviate one way or another. And finally, she asked the doctor when he stops by, "Doctor, do you still think I can get well?" This is a journal entry from June 27th, 1939. And he says, "No, Rhoda, you cannot." Well, that's pretty direct. And so I think that the little flower had something else in mind, and as did our Lord. So, and I should say that our Lord had appeared to her once, and it had been about 31 days before this journal entry that I just mentioned, because he said he would be back in 31 days. Now, she was suffering so badly, I don't think she had that in mind when on June 28, 1939, she awoke, and she says this: "While I saw Jesus again last night standing in my bedroom door. While I looked at him, he said, 'Here I am.' As I said, St. Therese, the little flower, was right by him. She came to my bedside and wanted the cover off me. I pushed it off, and she wanted the dressing off, so I pushed them off. She put her hand on my stomach and said, 'You doubted me before. You have been tried in the fire and not found wanting. Faith cures all things.' She walked back to Jesus, and when I looked at him, he said, 'I will come again. There is work yet to be done.' And they vanished." Now, she looked down. It says, "I looked at my stomach. I was entirely healed. Not one drop of anything had even run on my stomach. That awful irritation and everything was gone. What my feelings were, I can never tell." So that's the amazing, first miracle that, besides the apparitions and the, appearance of Jesus to her earlier, this physical miracle was just the beginning of her journey, because she was sitting there in a cast and said she told everybody she forgot to ask St. Therese to heal her foot, but oh well, she felt so much better without the pain in the stomach. So they recasted her, expecting her to be in this last cast for about 2 or 3 months, and then they were going to fit her for the brace. Well, when she came home, this cast was so tight and so painful that she was literally in tears. So on August 15th, 1939, she writes this: "Oh, what a day. I was so happy to begin with because the little flower came to me and cured my foot. I was sitting up in bed and crying because my foot hurt so much. The little flower came and said, 'That is a little thing. Stand up and walk.' I stood right up on my feet, and the cast broke, and I stepped right out of it. And she said, 'Go to church now.'" Now, if you could imagine, she's been in bed for a couple of years. Going to church wasn't an easy task. And in reading her biography, written by Karen Sigler, the book is called Her Name Means Rose, the Rhoda Wise story. I had to chuckle a little bit about the reality of them going to neighbors at 4:30 in the morning and getting a ride to church. And
because they didn't have a car, and the church is about 4 miles away.
And she didn't even have clothes to wear, so her husband had to go to his sister-in-law, who lived close by, and they had to find clothes for her to get dressed in and cleaned up and go to Mass. So she made it to the chapel at Mercy Hospital, where she walked past all the nurses and doctors she'd been seeing for over 9 years, in and out, and perfectly healed. And you can imagine that scene. I think that's pretty epic.
Well, it's absolutely amazing. And during these 10 years, she had over 28 apparitions, and once again, being blessed with the graces to have these, during these trials, and they didn't cease. Some of these trials continued.
And, there were many miracles and many trials during this time. Jeff, you mentioned earlier to me, how many people came by her house?
So during this time period, that in the early 1940s,
after the miracles,
and then, of course, you had on Good Friday of April 3rd, 1942, where she received the bleeding stigmata on her forehead, and it would, continue and appear and bleed at intervals over the next 2 years. Then in 1943, she had the bleeding stigmata on her hands and feet as well as her forehead, and this is when the thousands of people started to kind of walk through the home or have vigil outside. Once again, this is a tiny shack. Mm-hmm. This was right next to the city dump. I mean, it was not a place where a lot of people could fit, nor would you want to be. But thousands of people came and witnessed the bright light coming from her window during these special times and during the apparitions. And so, it was very clear that word was spreading, and even though in her exhausted state, she wanted to do this and be witness to others.
Yeah, and she did witness to many people, and there were many miracles that, of course, happened surrounding this suffering victim soul. Who I want to share one miracle in particular, because this might be this is probably the most well-known healing of Rhoda Wise's, involving Rhoda Wise, and that is the healing of Rita Rizzo. And I want to read this entry. This is a quote from Rita Rizzo about her healing when she went to Rhoda Wise. And she says, "I remember that time as though it were yesterday. It was Friday, January 8th, 1943. Physically, I was really at the end of my rope, and I saw this as my last hope. The doctors didn't really seem to be able to do anything. I was a bit skeptical as we entered Mrs. Wise's house, but her warm, congenial manner put us at ease immediately. I can't put into words the feelings that swept over me as I entered the room where Jesus appeared to Mrs. Wise. It was awesome. That's the only way I can describe it. We weren't there more than 30 minutes altogether. Mrs. Wise gave me a prayer to recite, asking the intercession of St. Therese, which, of course, I read with all the faith I had in me. I promised that, if healed, I would share with others this devotion to the little flower. We left the house that night with high expectations, although my abdominal pain was as severe as ever, and this caused me some concern. But we prayed the novena, which is 9 days of prayer, and at the end of that time, on Sunday, January 17th, something began to happen. I experienced deep misgivings and doubts about the entire episode and was tempted to forget the whole thing. I went to bed. In the middle of the night, I suffered the worst stomach pain ever in one brief moment. It was as if I had been turned inside out. That morning, I got up and prepared to go to the 11:30 a.m. Mass. It was Sunday. Then my heart skipped a beat. I suddenly realized that there was no pain whatsoever in my stomach. It was as if there had never been a problem. I walked around the house almost in a daze, unbelieving. I was healed. There was absolutely no question about it. From that day till this, I have had no stomach pain. God had indeed performed a miracle in my life." And that's the end of her quote. And this healing was the beginning of Mother Angelica's lifelong commitment to God. For Rita Rizzo is and was, who is now known as Mother Angelica.
Who's a really famous person from Canton, Ohio. But no, it's amazing that that her mom and really Mother Angelica's mom was not mentally stable for a period of time. She had health issues as well, but she wanted to do anything possible for her daughter to be cured of the stomach pain, and she was losing 20 pounds and whatnot, and so she did what a lot of people in the area, not just in Canton, but also in the surrounding areas did. They brought the sick, the lame, to come and see Rhoda Wise in just hopes of a miracle. And thank goodness, for Mother Angelica's miracle that eventually led her into religious life.
And there were many other miracles. And Jeff, you were talking about the stigmata. So, if you can imagine, after all of the suffering that she had experienced, and I wanted to add one more miracle, just so we don't forget the miracle of George, who was healed of his alcoholism, and he just kind of a little interesting side note. Monsignor Habig asked him about, he questioned him because he said that Jesus had come to him. And Monsignor Habig is like, well, what happened? He goes, well, I turned over and tried to look away. And then he appeared there too. And he goes, well, then what do you say? And he looked at Monsignor Habig and said he didn't have to say anything. And that was the last day that George would ever drink alcohol. And soon after, his brother and sister-in-law, I mentioned, had been awakened at 4:30 in the morning to take Rhoda to church. They all became Catholic, as well as her daughter Anna Mae, about a year after that as well, became Catholic.
And another bit of trivia, which probably most of you are not as interested in as my family is, but this is the same Monsignor Habig, who is the spiritual director for Rhoda Wise, married my grandparents, and I just find it absolutely amazing that, once again, this was all taking place in Canton. Thousands of people going. My grandparents were married by Monsignor Habig, who was the spiritual director of Rhoda Wise. And not only myself, but my dad, my uncle, we never heard of Rhoda Wise until maybe about 15 years ago. That was it. And I just find it absolutely amazing that these miracles were happening just down the street. I mean, less than 2 miles away down the street. These miracles happened. And I think it was a sign of the times that, once again, you have to be, fairly cautious about these sorts of miracles, and you want to make sure that they're validated. But if you go to her website, rhodawise.com, and you'll see the pictures of the stigmata. I mean, it's they're very graphic. I mean, but it is what it is. That's why thousands of people came.
And you'll see those pictures too. Thousands of people
Mm-hmm.
outside this little tiny shack in Canton, Ohio, it's just amazing to look at. So strongly recommend that.
Yeah, and when she died, over 14,000 people paid their respects, and so it's. Once again, it takes a while for the process to begin. Officially, it has to take place at least 5 years after the death of the person, and so that's where we find ourselves in the process. And I think, as kind of a takeaway, we didn't really expect very much when we went there. I learned a tremendous amount more, and sure, I know you did as well. What was at least one takeaway that will stick with you in terms of remembering Rhoda Wise, servant of God?
There's actually so many, and I think we're just telling you a few of the miracles. There were miracles of rose petals that were on Rhoda's bed when she woke up, that had images on them, beautiful images that could be seen with special photography. And then there were the miracle later of her daughter, Anna May. By the way, Anna May, she got married and went away and had kids, but her father was left after Rhoda passed away, and he was having a hard time keeping up with people continuing to pour into their home and experience the graces, but he didn't want to close it down either. But he was getting very old and feeble. And so Anna May dropped everything, brought her family back, and she continued to live there until she died in her 70s, continuing to spread her mother's story and from her perspective, which is also where Karen Sigler, who wrote the biography, she spent 13 years with Anna May, talking to her about her experience and her mother so that she could be able to write this biography. But during that time, as you can imagine, Anna May was very tired. People were coming. Jeff mentioned, it was hard on Rhoda, but Anna May also had a hard time. And so they were, there was this experience of our Lord who came many times to Rhoda, but he blessed some holy water. And that holy water was something that they continued to, per Monsignor Habig's advice, only get to a third of the way and then pour more in so that it would continue to be blessed by our Lord. So they continued to do that years and years later. And then there was this one day that Anna May was just tired. She was frustrated. Her friend could even tell they were both, filling the jug and filling the little jars of holy water to share with people. And what happened, though, is during this frustration, there appeared a bright light. Look, she said, like a sparkler you'd see on the 4th of July. And they looked, and there was a host inside the jar. And this kind of enlivened Anna May. She stopped complaining forever after that. And we saw the host. It's still there in the jar of holy water that they still use and share that holy water today. That's one of my walkaways. Also, just keep praying the rosary, keep praying and trusting in our Lord. That's the most important walkaway. Remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death, and it stared back.